Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepytimetales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Now, the usual convention with most podcasts is to put the promotion stuff and cup rattling halfway through or even at the end. But if all goes well, you're going to be asleep long before we get there, so I need to put this stuff up front. This show is brought to you, as always, by the supporters on Patreon. I'm hearing from more people all the time how valuable they find the show, and those supporters who have the means to help fund it, to keep it going and help me to reach new audiences are much appreciated. So if you're making use of Sleepytimetales regularly to help you deal with sleeplessness, and you have the urge to support the show, and of course, most importantly, if you have the means, please check out patreon.com/sleepytimetales or go to the link in the show notes or from the website. You will have the satisfaction of knowing that you're contributing to the rest and lifestyle improvements of thousands of people. And over and above that, there are real rewards from as little as $2 a month. From early release of the weekly episodes to weekly bonus episodes and special edits of the main show, depending on the level at which you support. But if supporting something every week seems a little bit much, then there are once-off things like the tip jar, the merchandise store, and others. But arguably, even a bigger way you can help is just to spread the word. If there is someone else in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepytimetales, just let them know. If you recommend the show on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I know and I can thank you. That's at Sleepytimetales on Instagram or Twitter. I don't have very much to shout out this week, but I did get a very nice mention on Instagram from Can You Catch a Cloud, who recommended it to her followers and said that I have a very kind voice, which was a very kind thing to say and very sweet. So thank you very much to you. As I said, not much else to shout out tonight, so I'm going to make this quick and give props to the music. As usual, the song is Un Désert by Kumiko. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive, and I've linked their website in the show notes as I've got some very cool stuff released under various names that I recommend checking out. Thank you for taking the time, and back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepytimetales? What is it for? It's a bit of a strange idea, isn't it, after all? A podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself just not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Now, I've struggled to sleep, basically since I was born. Even when I was a baby, I gave my parents sleepless nights for many years, and once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, sleep really was always a struggle for me. It was only later in life that I discovered the tendency for droning voices, most especially male ones, to act almost like a tranquilizer for me. I used to go to bed with podcasts to listen to because I'd come to terms with the fact that I had insomnia, and I'd find myself waking up having slept through everything I was actually trying to listen to. Eventually, I figured out what was going on, and I just started to listen to shows specifically to help me sleep. The backlogs of shows I enjoyed and stuff like that. Quite recently, though, probably about 2 years ago as I record this, I discovered that there are podcasts out there actually aimed at helping people to sleep. I discovered a couple that worked quite nicely for me, but when I recommended them to other people, for various reasons, they didn't quite work out. Sometimes they didn't like the narrator's voices, or they didn't like the topics they covered, or something like that, or just the strangeness of the idea was off-putting to them. But now I can't help with the strangeness of the idea, obviously. But I do have a voice that's deep and drony and rather boring to listen to, so I figured let me try do my part to see if I can help reach those that haven't been able to be helped by other sleep podcasts. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. I've mentioned before that if I get a complaint, it's the one thing that I get a complaint about, but those people don't quite get it. This intro is actually the most important part of the show, and it is so for two reasons. Firstly, I need to explain to new listeners, which I've been doing so far, exactly what it's for, and I'll go into how I think it'll help you to engage with it. But for all the listeners, it serves a very different purpose. Now, obviously, we're here at episode 85, and if you've been listening for a while, you know exactly what's what. But now for people who've been listening to the show for a while, we are trying to do something special together here. We're trying to prepare a space, help you develop new habits to help you sleep. Because insomnia is a habit much like smoking or biting your fingernails, and the best way to get rid of a habit is to replace it with another one. So I'm trying to help you to develop good habits here, better sleep hygiene, help you prepare the space for to settle in. Because that's what we're doing here. We're building a space together, a nest or a cave or a little cozy cabin in the woods, somewhere where you can feel safe and comfortable and drift away. Now, as far as I know, there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, I need something to focus on. A story or an event that lets me keep my mind on a specific point. Something to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties. I need to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of sleep when it comes for me. Some people might need something a little bit different though. White noise is a big thing these days, or just some general background, and maybe you just need the sound of the waves or sound of wind in the trees or just some boring dude droning on in the background. I've got to be honest, I'm actually struggling a little bit to record here tonight because it is quite late. I've been working quite hard. I'm very tired. And the rain is, I don't think it's loud enough for you to hear, but let's see. No, I don't think you can hear that, but it's quite a shame because it's very relaxing and would be quite nice as the background to this. But I also don't really want to interfere with the purity of the show. The people that have been listening to this for a while really just know what helps, and they're here for my voice. Tonight's sleepy story is a very old proto-science fiction from Tarzan writer Edgar Rice Burroughs. He wrote a series of books about the hollow earth, about a mysterious land inside our world. And this is an extract from the second book in the series, which I didn't realize until I did a little bit of research after the reading, called Pellucidar. A man finds a mysterious telegraph point in the Sahara Desert and seeks out an author who wrote an unlikely sounding story before, because it seemed to be connected with his tale of traveling under the earth. But whatever the story is, whether it's a romance or some strange science fiction, the most important thing is whatever you're listening to, you don't try to force to sleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the story and allow sleep to come for you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's very important that you don't feel pressurized. It may not work on the first night. In fact, I'd be willing to bet it'll take you a good few nights to really get into the swing of this, to get used to the sound of my voice and get over the resistance of this, to the strangeness of this whole idea. This idea of having some boring dude talk to you while you're asleep. I do recommend a solid 2 or 3 nights trying. I'd suggest 3. If by the end of the 3rd night this isn't working for you, then maybe I'm not for you. If it doesn't work out, you can even ask me for recommendations and I can tell you what works for me. In fact, I'll tell you now anyway. The things that I listen to when I go to sleep are Sleep With Me, which is basically the great granddaddy of sleep podcasts. And another one is Boring Books for Bedtime. Both very different shows, both very effective for me personally. I'm very happy to, with my listeners, mix it up and listen to those and others as well. Or if this doesn't work for you, then maybe they will be able to help. Also for me, what I often do, because now these days, my problem actually isn't so much going to sleep. My problem is waking up in the middle of the night. It gets to like 3 a.m., 3:30 and I'm awake and I don't even quite realize that I'm awake and lying there, not sleeping, not resting. But what I do is I queue up a few episodes of the show. In fact, I queue up a whole bunch. I usually download a good chunk and then I start with the latest one when I go to bed. And then if I wake up in the middle of the night, there will be something going on there and I can just, if my earbuds have fallen out, I can just pop them back in and go straight back to sleep. Sometimes I even wake up like 30 minutes or 60 minutes before my alarm and I do exactly the same thing then. It may sound strange, what is the point of getting an extra 30 minutes or 60 minutes of sleep? But I've got to tell you that sometimes that is just the best part of my night. There's that complete relaxation right before you're due to wake up that is just satisfying on a whole new level. But it's very important whether you're trying to go to sleep or waking up in the night or waking up before your alarm, you need to try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this will probably seem strange for you. So I ask that you give it a chance. I've given you the basic idea after all. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way, or maybe not so small. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes life hard. So I'm here to do my small part to help you in a big way, to help you face tomorrow and the day after, well rested and better able to cope and process. I believe very strongly in kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. And it's all in vain if you can't be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get yourself over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep, and the intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and we'll try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep can feel like an enemy, but it's not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life and progress shining bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Pellucidar by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Prologue. Several years had elapsed since I found the opportunity to do any big game hunting. For at last I had my plans almost perfected for a return to my old stamping grounds in northern Africa, where in other days I had had excellent sport in pursuit of the king of beasts. The date of my departure had been set. I was to leave in 2 weeks. No schoolboy accounting the lagging hours that must pass before the beginning of long vacation released him to the delirious joys of the summer camp could have been filled with greater impatience or keener anticipation. Then came a letter that started me for Africa 12 days ahead of my schedule. Often am I in receipt of letters from strangers who have found something in a story of mine to commend or condemn. My interest in this department of my correspondence is ever fresh. I opened this particular letter with all the zest of pleasurable anticipation with which I had opened so many others. The postmark, Algiers, had aroused my interest and curiosity, especially at this time, since it was Algiers that was presently to witness the termination of my coming sea voyage in search of sport and adventure. Before the reading of that letter was completed, lions and lion hunting had fled my thoughts, and I was in a state of excitement bordering upon frenzy. Well, read it yourself and see if you too do not find food for frantic conjecture, for tantalizing doubts, and for a great hope. Here it is. Dear Sir, I think that I've run across one of the most remarkable coincidences in modern literature, but let me start at the beginning. I am by profession a wanderer upon the face of the earth. I have no trade, nor any other occupation. My father bequeathed me a competency. Some remote ancestors lust to roam. I have combined the two and invested them carefully and without extravagance. I became interested in your story, At the Earth's Core, not so much because of the probability of the tale as of a great and abiding wonder that people should be paid real money for writing such impossible trash. You will pardon my candor, but it is necessary that you understand my mental attitude towards this particular story, that you may credit that which follows. Shortly thereafter, I started for the Sahara in search of a rather rare species of antelope that is to be found only occasionally within a limited area at a certain season of the year. My chase led me far from the haunts of man. It was a fruitless search, however, insofar as antelope is concerned. But one night, as I lay courting sleep at the edge of a little cluster of date palms that surrounded an ancient well in the midst of the arid, shifting sands, I suddenly became conscious of a strange sound coming apparently from the earth beneath my head. It was an intermittent ticking. No reptile or insect with which I am familiar reproduces any such notes. I lay for an hour, listening intently. At last my curiosity got the better of me. I rose, lighted my lamp, and commenced to investigate. My bedding lay upon a rug stretched directly upon the warm sand. The noise appeared to be coming from beneath the rug. I raised it, but found nothing. Yet at intervals the sound continued. I dug into the sand with the point of my hunting knife. A few inches below the surface of the sand I encountered a solid substance that had the feel of wood beneath the sharp steel. Excavating about it, I unearthed a small wooden box. From this receptacle issued the strange sound that I had heard. How had it come here? What did it contain? In attempting to lift it from its burying place, I discovered that it seemed to be held fast by means of a very small insulated cable running further into the sand beneath it. My first impulse was to drag the thing loose by main strength, but fortunately I thought better of this and fell to examining the box. I soon saw that it was covered by a hinged lid, which was held closed by a simple screw hook and eye. It took but a moment to loosen this and raise the cover, when, to my utter astonishment, I discovered an ordinary telegraph instrument clicking away within. What in the world, thought I, is this thing doing here? That it was a French military instrument was my first guess, but really there didn't seem much likelihood that this was the correct explanation, when one took into account the loneliness and remoteness of the spot. As I sat gazing at my remarkable find, which was ticking and clicking away, there in the silence of the desert night, trying to convey some message which I was unable to interpret, my eyes fell upon a bit of paper lying at the bottom of the box beside the instrument. I picked it up and examined it. Upon it were written but two letters, D.I. They meant nothing to me then. I was baffled. Once in an interval of silence upon the part of the receiving instrument, I moved the sending key up and down a few times. Instantly, the receiving mechanism commenced to work frantically. I tried to recall something of the Morse code with which I had played as a little boy, but time had obliterated it from my memory. I became almost frantic as I let my imagination run riot among the possibilities for which this clicking instrument might stand. Some poor devil at the unknown other end might be in dire need of succor. The very franticness of the instrument's wild clashing betokened something of the kind. And there sat I, powerless to interpret, and so powerless to help. It was then that the inspiration came to me. In a flash there leapt to my mind the closing paragraphs of the story I had read in the club at Algiers. Does the answer lie somewhere upon the bosom of the broad Sahara, at the ends of two tiny wires, hidden beneath a lost cairn? The idea seemed preposterous. Experience and intelligence combined to assure me that there could be no slightest grain of truth or possibility in your wild tale. It was fiction, pure and simple. And yet, where were the other ends of these wires? What was this instrument, ticking away here in the great Sahara, but a travesty upon the possible? Would I have believed in it had I not seen it with my own eyes? And the initials, D.I., upon the slip of paper? David's initials were these, David Ennis. I smiled at my imaginings. I ridiculed the assumption that there was an inner world and that these wires led downward through the earth's crust to the surface of Pellucidar. And yet, well, I sat there all night, listening to that tantalizing clicking, now and then moving the sending key just to let the other know that the instrument had been discovered. In the morning, after carefully returning the box to its hole and covering it over with sand, I called my servants about me, snatched a hurried breakfast, mounted my horse, and started upon a forced march for Algiers. I arrived here today. In writing you this letter, I feel that I'm making a fool of myself. There is no David Ennis. There is no Diane the Beautiful. There is no world within a world. Pellucidar is but a realm of your imagination, nothing more. But the incident of the finding of that buried telegraph instrument upon the lonely Sahara is little short of uncanny in view of your story of the adventures of David Ennis. I have called it one of the more remarkable coincidences in modern fiction. I called it literature before, but again, pardon my candor, your story is not. And now, why am I writing you? Heaven knows, unless it is that persistent clicking of that unfathomable enigma out there in the vast silences of the Sahara has so wrought upon my nerves that reason refuses longer to function sanely. I cannot hear it now, yet I know that far away to the south, all alone beneath the sands, It is still pounding out its vain, frantic appeal. It is maddening. It is your fault. I want you to release me from it. Cable me at once, at my expense, that there was no basis of fact for your story at the Earth's core. Very respectfully yours, Cogden Nestor. Algiers, June 1st. 10 minutes after reading this letter, I had cabled Mr. Nestor as follows. Story true. Await me, Algiers. As fast as train and boat would carry me, I sped toward my destination. For all those dragging days, my mind was a whirl of mad conjecture, of frantic hope, of numbing fear. The finding of the telegraph instrument practically assured me that David Innes had driven Perry's iron mole back through the Earth's crust to the buried world of Pellucidar. But what adventures had befallen him since his return? Had he found Dion the Beautiful, his half-savage mate, safe among his friends? Or had Hooja the Sly One succeeded in his nefarious schemes to abduct her? Did Abner Perry, the lovable old inventor and paleontologist, still live? Had the federated tribes of Pellucidar succeeded in overthrowing the mighty Mahars, the dominant race of reptilian monsters and their fierce gorilla-like soldiery, the savage Sagoths? I must admit that I was in a state bordering upon nervous prostration when I entered the club in Algiers and inquired for Mr. Nestor. A moment later, I was ushered into his presence, to find myself clasping hands with the sort of chap that the world holds only too few of. He was a tall, smooth-faced man of about 30, clean-cut, straight and strong, and weather-tanned to the hue of a desert Arab. I liked him immensely from the first, and I hoped that after our 3 months together in the desert country, 3 months not entirely lacking in adventure, he found that a man may be a writer of impossible trash, and yet have some redeeming qualities. The day following my arrival at Algiers, we left for the south. Nestor having made all arrangements in advance, guessing as he naturally did that I could be coming to Africa for but a single purpose: to hasten at once to the buried telegraph instrument and wrest its secret from it. In addition to our native servants, we took along an English telegraph operator named Frank Downes. Nothing of interest enlivened our journey by rail and caravan till we came to the cluster of date palms about the ancient well upon the rim of the Sahara. It was the very spot at which I had first seen David Innes. If he had ever raised a cairn above the telegraph instrument, no sign of it remained now. Had it not been for the chance that caused Cogden Nestor to throw down his sleeping rug directly over the hidden instrument, it might still be clicking there unheard, and this story still unwritten. When we reached the spot and unearthed the little box, the instrument was quiet. Nor did repeated attempts upon the part of our telegrapher succeed in winning a response from the other end of the line. After several days of futile endeavor to raise Pellucidar, we had begun to despair. I was as positive that the other end of that little cable protruded through the surface of the inner world as I am that I sit here today in my study, when about the midnight of the 4th day, I was awakened by the sound of the instrument. Leaping to my feet, I grasped Downes roughly by the neck and dragged him out of his blankets. He didn't need to be told what caused my excitement, for the instant he was awake he too heard the long-hoped-for click, and with a whoop of delight pounced upon the instrument. Nestor was on his feet almost as soon as I. The three of us huddled about that little box as if our lives depended upon the message it had for us. Downes interrupted the clicking with his sending key. The noise of the receiver stopped instantly. "Ask who it is, Downes," I directed. He did so, and while we waited the Englishman's translation of the reply, I doubt if either Nestor nor I breathed. "He says he's David Innes," said Downes. "He wants to know who we are." "Tell him," said I, "and what we want to know how he is, and all that has befallen him since I last saw him." For 2 months I talked with David Innes almost every day, and as Downs translated, either Nestor or I took notes. From these, arranged in chronological order, I have set down the following account of the further adventures of David Innes at the Earth's core, practically in his own words. Chapter 1. Lost on Pellucidar. The Arabs, of whom I wrote you at the end of my last letter, Innes began, and whom I thought to be enemies intent only upon murdering me, proved to be exceedingly friendly. They were searching for the very band of marauders that had threatened my existence. The huge Rhamphorhynchus-like reptile that I'd brought back with me from the inner world, the ugly Mahar that Hooja the Sly One had substituted for my dear Dion at the moment of my departure, filled them with wonder and awe. Nor less so did the mighty subterranean prospector which had carried me to Pellucidar and back again, and which lay out in the desert about 2 miles from my camp. With their help I managed to get the unwieldy tons of its great bulk into a vertical position, the nose deep in a hole we had dug in the sand, and the rest of it supported by the trunks of date palms cut for the purpose. It was a mighty engineering job with only wild Arabs and their wilder mounts to do the work of an electric crane, but finally it was completed and I was ready for departure. For some time I hesitated to take the Mahar back with me. She had been docile and quiet ever since she had discovered herself virtually a prisoner aboard the Iron Mole. It had been, of course, impossible for me to communicate with her since she had no auditory organs, and I had no knowledge of her fourth dimension, sixth sense method of communication. Naturally, I am kind-hearted, and so I found it beyond me to leave even this hateful and repulsive thing alone in a strange and hostile world. The result was that when I entered the Iron Mole, I took her with me. That she knew we were about to return to Pellucidar was evident, for immediately her manner changed from that of a habitual gloom that had pervaded her to an almost human expression of contentment and delight. Our trip through the Earth's crust was but a repetition of my 2 former journeys between the inner and outer worlds. This time, however, I imagine that we must have maintained a more nearly perpendicular course, for we accomplished the journey in a few minutes less time than upon the occasion of my first journey through the 500-mile crust. Just a trifle less than 72 hours after our departure into the sands of the Sahara, we broke through the surface of Pellucidar. Fortune once again favoured me by the slightest of margins, for when I opened the door in the prospector's outer jacket, I saw that we had missed coming up through the bottom of an ocean by but a few hundred yards. The aspect of the surrounding country was entirely unfamiliar to me. I had no conception of precisely where I was upon the 124 million square miles of Pellucidar's vast land surface. The perpetual midday sun poured down its torrent rays from zenith, as it had done since the beginning of Pellucidarian time, as it would continue to do so to the end of it. Before me, across the wide sea, the weird horizonless seascape folded gently upward to meet the sky until it lost itself to view in the azure depths of distance, far above the level of my eyes. How strange it looked! How vastly different from the flat and puny area of the circumscribed vision of the dweller upon the outer crust. I was lost. Though I wandered ceaselessly throughout a lifetime, I might never discover the whereabouts of my former friends of this strange and savage world. Never again might I see a dear old Perry, nor Gak the hairy one, nor Dacor the strong one, nor that other infinitely precious one, my sweet and noble mate, Dion the beautiful. But even so, I was glad to tread once more on the surface of Pellucidar. Mysterious and terrible, grotesque and savage though she is in many of her aspects, I cannot but love her. Her very savagery appealed to me, for it is the savagery of unspoiled nature. The magnificence of her tropic beauties enthralled me. Her mighty land areas breathed unfettered freedom. Her untracked oceans, whispering of virgin wonders unsullied by the eye of man, beckoned me out upon her restless bosoms. Not for an instant did I regret the world of my nativity. I was in Pellucidar, I was home, and I was content. As I stood dreaming beside the giant thing that had brought me safely through the earth's crust, my travelling companion, the hideous Mahar, emerged from the interior of the prospector and stood beside me. For a long time she remained motionless. What thoughts were passing through the convolutions of her reptilian brain? I do not know. She was a member of the dominant race of Pellucidar. By a strange freak of evolution, her kind had first developed the power of reason in that world of anomalies. To her, creatures such as I were of a lower order. As Perry had discovered among the writings of her kind in the buried city of Putra, it was still an open question among the Mahars as to whether man possessed means of intelligent communication or the power of reason. Her kind believed that in the center of all-pervading solidity there was a single, vast, spherical cavity, which was Pellucidar. This cavity had been left there for the sole purpose of providing a place for the creation and propagation of the Mahar race. Everything within it had been put there for the uses of the Mahar. I wondered what this particular Mahar might think now. I found pleasure in speculating upon just what the effect had been on her of passing through the earth's crust and coming out into a world that one of even less intelligence than the great Mahars could easily see was a different world from her own Pellucidar. What had she thought of the outer world's tiny sun? What had been the effect upon her of the moon and myriad stars of the clear African nights? How had she explained them? With what sensations of awe must she first have watched the sun moving slowly across the heavens to disappear at last beneath the western horizon, leaving in his wake that which the Mahar had never before witnessed, the darkness of night. For upon Pellucidar there is no night. The stationary sun hangs forever in the center of the Pellucidarian sky, directly overhead. Then too she must have been impressed by the wondrous mechanism of the prospector, which had bored its way from world to world and back again, and that it had been driven by a rational being must also have occurred to her. Too, she had seen me conversing with other men upon the earth's surface. She had seen the arrival of the caravan of books and arms and ammunition, and the balance of the heterogeneous collection which I had crammed into the cabin of the iron mole for transportation to Pellucidar. She had seen all these evidences of a civilization and brain power transcending in scientific achievement anything that her race had produced. Nor once had she seen a creature of her own kind. There could have been but a single deduction in the mind of the Mahar, that there were other worlds than Pellucidar, and that the Gilak was a rational being. Now the creature at my side was creeping slowly toward the nearby sea. At my hip hung a long-barreled six-shooter. Somehow I'd been unable to find the same sensation of security in the newfangled automatics that had been perfected since my first departure from the outer world, and in my hand was a heavy express rifle. I could have shot the Mahar with ease, for I knew intuitively that she was escaping, but I did not. I felt that if she could return to her own kind with the story of her adventures, the position of the human race within Pellucidar would be advanced immensely at a single stride, for at once man would take his proper place in the considerations of the reptilia. At the edge of the sea, the creature paused and looked back at me. Then she slid sinuously into the surf. For several minutes I saw no more of her as she luxuriated in the cool depths. Then 100 yards from shore she rose, and there for another short while she floated upon the surface. Finally she spread her giant wings, flapped them vigorously a score of times, and rose above the blue sea. A single time she circled far aloft, and then straight as an arrow she sped away. I watched her until the distant haze enveloped her, and she had disappeared. I was alone. My first concern was to discover where within Pellucidar I might be, and in what direction lay the land of the Syrians where Gok the Hairy once ruled. But how was I to know in which direction lay Sari? And if I set out to search, what then? Could I find my way back to the Prospector with its priceless freight of books, firearms, ammunition, scientific instruments, and still more books? Its great library of reference works upon every conceivable branch of applied sciences? And if I could not, of what value was all this vast storehouse of potential civilization and progress to the world of my adoption? Upon the other hand, if I remained here alone with it, what could I accomplish single-handed? Nothing. But where there was no east, no west, no north, no south, no stars, no moon, and only a stationary midday sun, how was I to find my way back to the spot, should I ever get out of sight of it? I didn't know. For a long time I stood buried in deep thought, when it occurred to me to try out one of the compasses I had brought, and ascertain if it remained steadily fixed upon an unvarying pole. I re-entered the Prospector and fetched a compass without. Moving a considerable distance from the Prospector, that the needle might not be influenced by its great bulk of iron and steel, I turned the delicate instrument about in every direction. Always and steadily the needle remained rigidly fixed upon a point straight out to sea, apparently pointing towards a large island some 10 or 20 miles distant. This then should be north. I drew my notebook from my pocket and made a careful topographical sketch of the locality within the range of my vision. Due north lay the island, far out upon the shimmering sea. The spot I had chosen for my observations was the top of a large flat boulder which rose 6 or 8 feet above the turf. This spot I called the Greenwich. The boulder was the Royal Observatory. I had made a start. I cannot tell you what a sense of relief was imparted to me by the simple fact that there was at least one spot within Pellucidar with a familiar name and a place upon a map. It was with almost childish joy that I made a little circle in my notebook and traced the word Greenwich beside it. Now I felt I might start upon my search with some assurance of finding my way back again to the Prospector. I decided that at first I would travel directly south in the hope that I might in that direction find some familiar landmark. It was as good a direction as any. This much at least might be said of it. Among the many other things I had brought from the outer world were a number of pedometers. I slipped 3 of these into my pockets with the idea that I might arrive at a more or less accurate mean from the registrations of them all. On my map, I would register so many paces south, so many east, so many west, and so on. When I was ready to return, I would then do so by any route that I might choose. I also strapped a considerable quantity of ammunition across my shoulders, pocketed some matches, and hooked an aluminium fry pan and a small stew kettle of the same metal to my belt. I was ready to go forth and explore a world. Ready to search a land area of 124,110,000 square miles for my friends, my incomparable mate, and good old Perry. And so, after locking the door in the outer shell of the Prospector, I set out upon my quest. Due south I travelled, across lovely valleys thick dotted with grazing herds. Through dense primeval forests I forced my way, and up the slopes of mighty mountains, searching for a pass to their further sides. Ibex and musk sheep fell before my good old revolver, so that I lacked not for food in the higher altitudes. The forests and the plains gave plentifully of fruit and wild birds, antelope, oxen, and elk. Occasionally for the larger game animals and the gigantic beasts of prey, I used my express rifle, but for the most part the revolver filled my needs. There were times too when, faced by a mighty cave bear, a saber-toothed tiger, or a huge Felis spalaea, black-maned and terrible, even my powerful rifle seemed pitifully inadequate. But fortune favored me so that I passed unscathed through adventures that even the recollection of causes the short hairs to bristle at the nape of my neck. How long I wandered toward the south I do not know, for shortly after I left the prospectus something went wrong with my watch, and I was again at the mercy of the baffling timelessness of Pellucidar, forging steadily ahead beneath the great motionless sun which hangs eternally at noon. I ate many times, however, so that days must have elapsed, possibly months, with no familiar landscape rewarding my eager eyes. I saw no men, nor signs of men, nor is this strange, for Pellucidar in its land area is immense, while the human race there is very young and consequently far from numerous. Doubtless upon that long search, mine was the first human foot to touch the soil in many places. Mine was the first human eye to rest upon the gorgeous wonders of the landscape. It was a staggering thought. I could not but dwell upon it often as I made my lonely way through this virgin world. Then, quite suddenly one day, I stepped out of the peace of man as primality into the presence of man, and peace was gone. It happened thus. I had been following a ravine downward out of a chain of lofty hills, and had paused at its mouth to view the lovely little valley that lay before me. At one side was tangled wood, while straight ahead a river wound peacefully along parallel to the cliffs in which the hills terminated at the valley's edge. Presently, as I stood enjoying the lovely scene, as insatiate for nature's wonders as if I had not looked upon similar landscapes countless times, a sound of shouting broke from the direction of the woods. That the harsh, discordant notes rose from the throats of men, I could not doubt. I slipped behind a large boulder near the mouth of the ravine and waited. I could hear the crashing of underbrush in the forest, and I guessed that whoever came quickly, pursued and pursuers doubtless. In a short time, some hunted animal would break into view, and a moment later a score of half-naked savages would come leaping after, with spears or club or great stone knives. I had seen the thing so many times during my life within Pellucidar that I felt that I could anticipate to a nicety precisely what I was about to witness. I hoped that the hunters would prove friendly and be able to direct me towards Sari. Even as I was thinking these thoughts, the quarry emerged from the forest, but it was no terrified four-footed beast. Instead, what I saw was an old man, a terrified old man. Staggering feebly and hopelessly from what must have been some very terrible fate, if one could judge from the horrified expressions he continually cast behind him towards the wood, he came stumbling on in my direction. He had covered but a short distance from the forest when I beheld the first of his pursuers, a Sagoth, one of those grim and terrible guerrilla men who guard the mighty Mahars in their buried cities. Faring forth from time to time upon slave raiding or punitive expeditions against the human race of Pellucidar, of whom the dominant race of the inner world think as we think of the bison or wild sheep of our own world. Close behind the foremost Sagoth came others, until a full dozen raced, shouting after the terror-stricken old man. They would be upon him shortly. That was plain. One of them was rapidly overhauling him, his back-thrown spear arm testifying to his purpose. And then, quite with the suddenness of an unexpected blow, I realized a past familiarity with the gait and carriage of the fugitive. Simultaneously there swept over me in the staggering fact the old man was Perry, that he was about to die before my very eyes, with no hope that I could reach him in time to avert the awful catastrophe, for to me it meant a real catastrophe. Perry was my best friend. Diane, of course, I looked upon as more than a friend. She was my mate, a part of me. I had entirely forgotten the rifle in my hand and the revolvers at my belt. One does not readily synchronize his thoughts with the Stone Age and the 20th century simultaneously. Now, from past habits, I still thought in the Stone Age, and in my thoughts of the Stone Age was no thoughts of firearms. The fellow was almost upon Perry when the feel of the gun in my hand awoke me from the lethargy of terror that had gripped me. From behind my shoulder, I threw up the heavy express rifle, a mighty engine of destruction that might bring down a cave bear or a mammoth at a single shot, and let drive at the Sagoth's broad, hairy breast. At the sound of the shot, he stopped stock still. His spear dripped from his hand. Then he lunged forward upon his face. The effect upon the others was a little less remarkable. Perry alone could have possibly guessed the meaning of the loud report, or explained its connection with the sudden collapse of the Sagoth. The other gorilla men halted for but an instant. Then, with renewed shrieks of rage, they sprang forward to finish Perry. At the same time, I stepped from behind my boulder, drawing one of my revolvers that I might conserve the more precious ammunition of the express rifle. Quickly, I fired again with the lesser weapon. Then it was that all eyes were directed towards me. Another Sagoth fell to the bullet from the revolver, but it did not stop his companions. They were out for revenge as well as blood now, and they meant to have both. As I ran forward toward Perry, I fired 4 more shots, dropping 3 of our antagonists. Then at last the remaining 7 wavered. It was too much for them, this roaring death that leapt invisible upon them from a great distance. As they hesitated, I reached Perry's side. I have never seen such an expression upon any man's face as that upon Perry's when he recognized me. I have no words herewith to describe it. There was not time to talk then, scarce for a greeting. I thrust a full loaded revolver into his hand, fired the last shot in my own, and reloaded. There were but 6 Sagoths left. They started towards us once more, though I could see they were terrified, probably as much by the noise of the guns as by their effects. They never reached us. Halfway, the 3 that remained turned and fled, and we let them go. The last we saw of them, they were disappearing into the tangled undergrowth of the forest. And then Perry turned and threw his arms about my neck, and burying his old face upon my shoulder, wept like a child. Chapter 2. Traveling with Terror. We made camp there beside the peaceful river. There Perry told me all that had befallen him since I had departed for the outer crust. It seemed that Hooja had made it appear that I had intentionally left Dion behind, and that I did not purpose ever returning to Pellucidar. He told him that I was of another world, and that I had tired of this and of its inhabitants. To Dion, he explained that I had a mate in the world to which I was returning, that I had never intended taking Dion the Beautiful back with me, and that she had seen the last of me. Shortly afterward, Dion had disappeared from the camp, nor had Perry seen or heard aught of her since. He had no conception of the time that had elapsed since I had departed, but guessed that many years had dragged their slow way into the past. Hooja, too, had disappeared very soon after Dion had left. The Syrians under Guk the Hairy One and the Amazites under Dacor the Strong One, Dion's brother, had fallen out over my supposed defection, for Guk would not believe that I had thus treacherously deceived and deserted them. The result had been that these 2 powerful tribes had fallen upon another with the new weapons that Perry and I had taught them to make and to use. Other tribes of the new federation took sides with the original disputants or set up petty revolutions of their own. The result was the total demolition of the work which we had so well started. Taking advantage of the tribal war, the Mahars had gathered their Sagoths in force, and fallen upon one tribe after another in rapid succession, wreaking awful havoc among them and reducing them for the most part to as pitiable a state of terror as that from which we had raised them. Alone of all the once mighty federation, the Syrians and the Amazites with a few other tribes continued to maintain their defiance of the Mahars. But these tribes were still divided among themselves. Nor had it seemed at all probable to Perry, when he had last been among them, that any attempt at reamalgamation would be made. And thus, your Majesty, he concluded, has faded back into the oblivion of the Stone Age, our wondrous dream, and with it has gone the first empire of Pellucidar. We both had to smile at the use of my royal title, yet I was indeed still Emperor of Pellucidar, and someday I meant to rebuild what the vile act of the treacherous Hujar had torn down. But first I would find my Empress. To me, she was worth 40 empires. "Have you no clues to the whereabouts of Diane?" I asked. "None whatever," replied Perry. "It was in search of her that I came to the pretty pass in which you discovered me, and from which, David, you saved me." I knew perfectly well that she had not intentionally deserted either Diane or Pellucidar. I guessed that in some way Huja the Sly one was at the bottom of the matter, and I determined to go to Amos, where I guessed that Diane might come to the protection of her brother, and do my utmost to convince her, and through her, Draco the Strong One, that we had all been victims of a treacherous plot to which you were no party. I came to Amos after a most trying and terrible journey, only to find that Diane was not among her brother's people, and that they knew naught of her whereabouts. Draco, I am sure, wanted to be fair and just, but so great were his grief and anger over the disappearance of his sister that he could not listen to reason, but kept repeating time and again that only your return to Pellucidar could prove the honesty of your intentions. Then came a stranger from another tribe, sent I'm sure at the instigation of Hujar. He so turned the Amazites against me that I was forced to flee their country to escape assassination. In attempting to return to Sari, I became lost, and then the Sagoths discovered me. For a long time I eluded them, hiding in caves and wading in rivers to throw them off my trail. I lived on nuts and fruits and the edible roots that chance threw in my way. I travelled on, and in what directions I could not even guess, and at last I could elude them no longer, and the end came as I'd long foreseen that it would come, except that I had not foreseen that you would be there to save me. We rested in our camp until Perry had regained sufficient strength to travel again. We planned much, rebuilding all our shattered air castles, but above all, we planned most to find Diane. I could not believe that she was dead, yet where she might be in this savage world and under what frightful conditions she might be living, I could not guess. When Perry was rested, we returned to the Prospector, where he fitted himself out fully like a civilized human being. Underclothing, socks, shoes, khaki jacket, and breeches, and good, substantial puttees. And I think I'm going to call that a night right there. If you enjoyed what you heard so far, you can find Pellucidar on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepytimetales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.